Support for the Pursuit of Music podcast is brought to you by Brooke Mays Music. Brooke Mays Music is a family of retail specialists who unify their professional skills and talents in order to focus on the needs of music education and educators. Their main goal is to increase the number of active instrumental music makers. Their objectives include, number 1, maintain strong working relationships for the lifespan of the music maker's career, and number 2, encourage the love and participation in music, and finally, number 3, being an active advocate for support of music in the schools. The voice of music education drives our actions. Thank you so much to our sponsors, Brooke Mays Music.
So welcome, everybody. We have a special guest on today. This is Mr. John Alstrin, the new Director of Fine Arts for Prosper ISD. And I've been working with John forever, since rocks were soft. I guess it's 9 years now.
Yeah, I think that's about right. 9, 10?
Yeah. Does it feel for like forever?
Yeah.
I've been a part of your life for a long time.
Yeah, half my career.
Yeah.
I got a kind of unique perspective on that because I was a student while you were teaching. I remember listening to you play Mahler 5 upstairs while I was in the middle of ensemble.
Huh.
And it was, I just think back to those times, like we've already said this, but you gave me my first Easter gig, I believe it was.
Yeah.
Were you still in high school at the time?
Yes. That was, so your first year at Bell was my first year at Bell. So I remember the memory that is the clearest to me is we were all sitting there in the middle of our first music block, and nobody really knew who you were yet, but we're all sitting there and listening to our director talk, and Mr. Alstrin is on the side, and this kid in the trumpet section kind of starts dozing off like this. And you knew the kid's name, or you said something like, hey,
I already
that
know
kid,
where this is going.
What did he just say? Or so you were talking, what did I just say? And we had never heard that before in our lives. And we all froze and we went, oh man, this guy's for real. We need to pay attention.
Yeah, and that's not my line. That's Tom Bennett. Tom Bennett did that at University of Houston when I was in the wind ensemble. We can talk about the storyline of how that'll happen, but just if we were to fast forward or reverse back to 2007, 8, I was in the U of H wind ensemble, and that's the first time that I had heard an adult ask a student, what did I just say? Who can tell me what I just said? And he said it to a group of college students in the premier wind ensemble, and I just was baffled, and I thought, what in the world is this professor doing? And I didn't really know Tom Bennett very well at the time, but I knew that I respected him, and I knew enough about him that I knew I was in the right place. And I found myself going, I better pay attention to what he's saying because he might call on me.
Yeah.
Right.
And it was such a simple switch of the brain to I'm accountable for whatever he says. And so it's really not a gotcha, but it is a checking for understanding, which is the basic thing. And it's, here, I'm going to hand you this pencil, don't drop it. It's, what we teach kids from the most early ages is just, I'm just going to give this to you. I'm going to say this word to you. You're going to say it back to me, just basic recall. And I tell students all the time, I wish that more teachers played that game with their students.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
yeah, I think that would help people in any classroom because it's not specific to band. Anybody who's in a classroom would be embarrassed.
It should be the foundation for basically every class. And I tell kids that that's level 1. Level 1 is repeating exactly verbatim, not interpreting it or paraphrasing it. That's level 2. Because then you're beginning to show understanding and demonstrate understanding, and being able to reword it means you kind of have a grasp of what they're saying, so you're able to change it up and put it in your own words to your understanding. And then level 3, if we're talking higher level thinking, is then connecting it to something else that was said earlier in a class or in the next class or a different concept from a different class. And then that synthesis, and now you're talking about higher level thinking. And so where we've gotten to, or where we got to in Prosper, was I was able to ask not only what did I just say, but who can tell me how this relates to what we just talked about yesterday? And because they're tracking with a storyline, most of the kids can kind of put the answers together pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So,
well, I think we should start just kind of as a starting point, just with your history, your childhood. I don't think there's very many people who know kind of where you're from, what your background is, how you even ended up in music. So do you mind just telling us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And interrupt as we go. If there's something that's curious to you, we can just kind of chase the rabbit down the hole. So I was born in San Francisco, California, on September 14th, which is tomorrow.
Oh, yeah. Happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
I'll be 43. 1976.
You don't look a day over 42.
Thank you. That's why I grew this, to show the silver. So I was born in California. My dad was a banker. My mom was stay-at-home mom and the school nurse. And had an older sister, Kathy, and grew up in Mill Valley, which is across the Golden Gate Bridge. My dad commuted across the Golden Gate every day. And we were there until I was 8. And so my first memories of music were singing in choir at the Methodist Church, and I can remember some music in second grade. And then fast forward, going into third grade, my dad said that we were going to move to Charlotte, North Carolina, because he had gotten a new job, and I was all excited. My sister was not excited because she was 6 years older than I was, so she was going into middle school to high school.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And she had friend group, and it was open concept learning in California, where it was basically like a huge class with 2 teachers, like almost 2 classrooms worth of kids, couches in the room, and you didn't have desks.
Huh. Is that like a Montessori type thing?
No, it was just traditional public school.
Really?
Wow.
But it had a family feel. So it was actually a husband-wife team that taught her. So anyway, I digress, but she really was connected to her teachers and the other kids, so pulling her out of that at that time was really stressful for her. Anyway, we moved to North Carolina, and I was in third grade. Not many memories of third grade because it was a transitional year, but fourth grade I started to have better memories. That towards the end of fourth grade was the point where the band directors came to our classroom and pulled us out one at a time and signed us up for band. And we chose instruments from a list of instruments, and so I selected trumpet, or they selected trumpet, probably looked at me and said trumpet. And next thing I know, we had a trumpet. And fifth grade, I was in a gym with about that was like a basement of a building with like 100 kids and one teacher.
Whoa.
Wow.
And all of the instruments, and nobody there to teach me how to play trumpet. You just figured it out.
Yeah.
No private lessons. And so that was fifth grade.
So why did you... So you don't remember if you picked the trumpet? Or?
I think it was selected for me.
Huh.
I remember a form, and then I remember a decision being made. Now, it could have been that my parents made the choice, because actually my grandfather on my mom's side, Dr. Prawl, was a child psychiatrist, and he grew up playing trumpet, cornet, violin, and singing, and could whistle. This is 1920s, 1930s, so I inherited a lot of that music. He actually played in the University of Virginia band. I have his picture in my office of him in the University of Virginia band back in 1930 something.
That's cool.
So there's a history there of trumpet, and maybe that's why it was. Maybe my parents selected trumpet. I don't know. And meanwhile, on the other side of the family tree, on my dad's side, his mother was a pianist, and so the piano in the Prosper Band Hall is actually our family piano. That was hers.
Huh.
And it's actually a really nice piano. So it's kind of excruciating to listen to people that can't play pound on it.
Right.
Anyway, she studied at the American Conservatory. Her dad was a judge in Chicago, and when it was time to raise a family, she stopped playing as much. The piano went to her house always, but she stopped playing, playing 8 hours a day.
Yeah.
I also inherited a lot of that music, so I have stacks and stacks of piano music that I will never be able to play.
Wow.
It's all turning shades of brown and.
Did you ever get to
rust
hear her
colored.
play, or was that?
I did, but she was pretty old at the time. I think she was in her late 70s or 80s, and she had arthritis and skinny, frail hands. But she played, and what the line that she played, I could tell, and at that point I was in band, and I could tell she was not playing it like we played band. It was my first memory of somebody playing musically.
How cool is that?
With rubato and expression. And I could just tell by the way she approached the keyboard and there's something in my brain that went, that's right. She's doing it right. That's right.
That's an interesting thing, because I don't know that everybody who would hear musicality like rubato and stuff like that would like feel that that's right.
Yeah, maybe it was me measuring what we were doing in band versus what I heard.
Right.
It didn't seem even, but it sounded pretty. It sounded different.
There is something about when you hear great performing the first time that kind of takes your breath away, because it's different.
Right.
It's not the normal,
and it makes you want to hear more of it.
Yeah, I remember the first time I heard the Cleveland Orchestra play, and they did a string piece, and they have the best string section apparently in the world, and from the first note, my breath was just taken away. I was like, I can't believe that a sound like that was produced.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you can do it on any instrument. When you haven't heard a characteristic sound or a beautiful sound on an instrument, like, say, for instance, tuba, or an instrument maybe that you just don't have a really great concept in your mind of, and you finally hear a professional play that, it shifts your brain and you go, oh, I have a new paradigm for that. That is now just shattered everything that I thought about that instrument.
Yeah.
Redefined it. And that's what college was for me, just redefining all of the instruments for me.
Right. So the time between when you were basically figuring out how to play musically on the trumpet in college, where you said you were in North Carolina, and then where did you go from there? Did you go straight? How did you end up in Texas?
So last we jumped off the railroad tracks was 5th grade, beginning band, then 6th grade intermediate band, what have you. North Carolina still, one director in a gym. I think we played bom 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 for our final concert.
Got to.
Right. That was the first memory I have of chair challenges. I was 3rd chair, and I think there's like 10 kids, and I knew that I would never beat the 2 kids in front of me because they were just better. Mm-hmm. And then I moved to Kansas. So my dad got another job, again, banker, got a nice job in Kansas City. So we moved to Kansas City, Kansas. And I was going into middle school, going into 7th grade. So then I was at Indian Hills Middle School, feeding into Shawnee Mission East High School. There was 6 or 7 trumpets in that band. John Selzer was my band director. He was a trumpet player, and was actually, this is kind of interesting, very different than Texas. He was our middle school band director, but he was also a high school band director at Shawnee Mission West. So we weren't even in his feeder plan.
Huh, weird.
But that worked into his schedule. So I was taking from a band director from a different cluster in middle school. And then Brian Nelson was a trumpet player, and he was taking lessons from Jim Spencer, who was a local teacher and taught at the Tune Shop, which was the music store. So at the music store, you'd go to take your lessons.
Right.
And all of the freelance guys and professionals, and like the legit players, knew to go to the Tune Shop to give lessons because you were going to teach. You have access to all of these kids from Shawnee Mission, and there's 5 Shawnee Mission high schools. So they were always teaching. There's a lot of kids going to the Tune Shop, and you could buy your books upstairs, your trumpet books or what have you, and then you could go down to the basement. And it was just a series of like 20 practice rooms with piano and voice lessons and all the instruments. And so I started taking from Jim Spencer because Brian Nelson was taking, and he was always sitting in front of me. And I thought, how am I going to catch Brian Nelson? Because I think I'm better than Brian Nelson, but he always has lessons, and so he always knows what's going on.
That's
so
funny.
that was my first impetus. That was my first nudge into like trying private lessons. And I liked Mr. Spencer. He was very organized, and I don't think that I reflected on how much he impacted my teaching and my approach to music. I don't think I really figured that out until about halfway through college at TCU.
Yeah.
I realized how much he had shaped me in 7th and 8th grade. And specifically what I mean by that is he was so organized in our half-hour lessons that we got a ton done. We always had a quick warm-up, but we played out of 4 books every lesson. And when I finished a book, I moved on to the next book. And every week I would have 2 or 3 or sometimes 4 lines assigned to me out of the book. And he would put the date. And then I would come back the next lesson, and he would play it with me one time, or he would play it for me one time. and then I would play. And if there was enough progress, I would get a signature or a signature and a plus. If I didn't show enough progress on that line, I was reassigned that line. And that taught me it was embarrassing to have to play the same line again the next week or even a third week. So I learned, well, I don't want to have to play that same line again, so I better work on it. Okay. And so in those 4 books, we were doing everything from, just basically what we're doing in 6th grade band, basic notes, basic rhythms that advance gradually, and he had about 100 books on his wall. So once you finished a book, he would pull out the next book and see if that was the next one for you or whatever. And then once he found the next book, you'd go upstairs and buy it.
Okay.
And then we would play duets, and we would play jazz duets, and we would work on a syncopation book. So we were covering the gamut.
In 30-minute lessons?
In 30-minute lessons. It was just this, then this, then this, then this. Here's your assignment. Next. It wasn't sitting around talking about your day, talking about your life, what makes you happy, what makes you sad. There was none of that. It was just, we're doing trumpet for 30 minutes. And he, this was back when computers were first being used to do notation software, and so he wrote his first book. He took all his favorite exercises, put them in a book, and charged me $10 for it, and I still have it. And I used it teaching all through college and then even after college.
Wow.
Very cool.
And it had Guittala exercises and Chikowitz, and it had all the scales and arpeggios and slurs, and it probably took him hours and hours and hours to do that because the notation software was so,
right,
dark ages at that point.
Yeah, it took forever.
So I started taking lessons with him, I think, in 8th grade, and then in 9th grade, 9th or 10th grade. So 9th grade, I was in the 2nd jazz band, and I had a solo on Little Darlin', and that's when I started sharing music with my Uncle Ted, who was in a wheelchair, and he grew up in the dance band era and had all of these records and recordings and stories and resources and articles. He gave me the Encyclopedia of Jazz, and it had all of these newspaper cutouts from when different artists had died.
Wow,
and their obituaries. So we shared jazz, and he would send me, we would make mixtapes. That was the big thing. Mike will probably remember that.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if you ever made a mixtape for anybody.
Never made a mixtape.
So if you had a good friend or a girl that you liked, you'd make a mixtape for him, and you'd pick all your favorite songs and handwrite all of the titles.
Sure.
To all
I
the
think
songs.
I maybe did that one time.
Yeah.
With MP3s and a playlist.
What's that?
With MP3s and a playlist.
Yeah.
I never made a mixed CD for anybody or a playlist. It was always a tape.
Okay, yeah, I would make little CDs, and my handwriting was garbage at the time, so they were always like, I like this song, but I can't read what it says on the CD.
The great thing about tapes is, when Michael, maybe you have the same memory, but I would wear a tape out. You'd put a tape in the tape deck, and you just let it roll, and then it would flip over automatically, and it would play the B side, and then go back to the A side. So songs had a way of just kind of working together, weaving together tapestries. Like, this song follows this song. Once I hear this song, I need to hear this song.
Yeah.
And really, the Beatles were the first band to really make that into a thing, where the experience of the album was the album. And the
progression through it. Yeah.
That's right. And the range of emotions and the moods that it puts you through. And that's what I think is so beautiful about tapes and even CDs. I have a CD in my car right now that I'm listening to, even though I have Spotify and I have Pandora.
Right.
I have access to anything, but I want to hear a CD because I want the predictability of and the nostalgia of this song follows this song follows this song. So anyway, I digress. So my sophomore year, I started taking I was in the tune shop, and I saw a flyer from Stan Kessler, and he was advertising jazz theory lessons. So I played in the 2nd jazz band. I loved the solo. I wanted to learn more about improvisation. Sophomore year, we also went to the Midwest Clinic. We were the selected orchestra, so our full orchestra went. And so I was playing, legit. I was playing classically, but I was also getting deep into jazz, and I started taking a 2nd trumpet lesson a week. So Jim Spencer was, meat and potatoes. I loved his sound. I wanted to sound like him. I was seeing progress there. But my parents were super supportive and said, yes, you can take from the 2nd trumpet teacher and do jazz. So I started with Stan around that time, and I would go to his house for lessons, and sometimes the lesson was an hour, sometimes it was 2.5 hours. And he would cook food. He would go off in the kitchen and disappear, and I would just keep practicing or keep playing, and he would just listen from the other room. Mm-hmm. And we would play records. He would show me how to transcribe off of records. We did theory. There's times that I didn't even get my trumpet out for the first hour because he'd pull out a manuscript tab and he would make me write out all my Dorian scales.
Wow.
Or I'd have to go to the piano and I'd have to learn how to voice chords and then do first inversion, second inversion. Because at that point I was talking about being a music major, so he said, well, I'll get you ready.
Right.
And he was adjunct faculty at UMKC, and I think still is. In addition to piano and trumpet and theory, we'd also do drum set.
Really?
Sit down, and he's a pretty good drummer, so he would just show me how to keep time, and all of that was just, so important for me as a young musician at that age. To be 16 years old, 15, 16 years old, and have somebody investing in you like they're trying to train a real player was just huge for me. And so I was always pretty good at jazz all through high school because of just his teaching, and we had a really solid jazz band.
So that had to have been a big adjustment to go from someone who was just real structured and this and this and this and this to kind of, I don't want to say an unstructured setting, but more of a exploratory setting. Your first couple of lessons with him had to have been a little odd to you.
Yeah, I would say that to you. We were talking about golf earlier, and we'll probably talk about golf more because I talk about golf a lot because my son's so into it. But the difference would be one coach is teaching you on a driving range, and the other coach is taking you out on the golf course and showing you how to play.
Right.
Right.
But the thing about Stan that was so important in how it connected to that was that if I just wasn't holding note values correctly, he would make me go back and do etudes. So we would go back a step. If my skill development wasn't strong enough,
right,
or just the basics weren't there, we weren't working on feeling improvisation. We were working on the science and the math of improvisation and chords and line and melody and what makes a melody and harmonic function. It wasn't just, hey, we're going to play some jazz, man. It wasn't like that at all. He was very much by the book. I mean, he was an all-stater.
Okay.
So, and he was the number one trumpet at Kansas back when he was in college. So he and then I think he was principal trumpet in the Kansas City Youth Orchestra. So he had his foundation. He understood the importance of meat and potatoes.
That's interesting because I was listening to an interview by Chris Bo Diaz. And you know who Chris Bo Diaz?
I don't.
He's a real famous jazz trumpet player. He's one of those guys that tours constantly. He doesn't own a home. He just lives in a hotel because he's always on the road. But people come to him and ask for lessons all the time, and he'll hear them play and say, well, you need to start by mastering the instrument first. And then come back, and then I'll talk to you about something.
Expression.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Right. So to finish out the high school years, the kind of key points were the Midwest Clinic was a pivotal moment for me. And that was 1992. Shawnee Mission East, like I said, was the featured orchestra, and there were some really strong players in that group, both in the strings and in the winds. Kansas is not like Texas, but Shawnee Mission East always had 4, 5, 6 all-staters, and all-staters are all-staters. I mean, the kids that I can remember from Kansas making all-state, and I never made it. I remember making tapes, but I never heard the results.
Right.
I would always make the district band, which was it's district and then state.
Right.
So I'd make district, and I'd be sitting by kids that made all-state. But then there might be a blip in my chromatic, and we had to play the Artunian for our all-state cuts. So I don't even know. I don't remember getting any feedback on like, well, here's where you came up short. But I did try out for that process.
That's frustrating.
And it was all done by tape in the band hall. But Matt McCready was principal trombone, and he is the fine arts director in Union. He was the band director at Union High School when they made Grand Nationals finals, and so I remember they were standing close to us and when we were at Bell, and so that was kind of a cool moment too. Shawnee Mission East kids standing on the sideline, and he's to date he's probably the best jazz trombone player I've ever heard, especially high school. And then his freshman year he went to Kansas, he went to KU and was lead trombone in the top jazz band there. He marched. He was one of the first kids. No, he is the first kid that I ever met that marched drum corps. He marched Star of Indiana back when Star of Indiana was the deal.
Right.
And we all thought he was strange for going all summer to go march. His dad was a band director.
Okay.
So his dad was in the know. But we were all really skeptical of, like, why would you spend your summer doing that?
Right.
Coming to find out, he, like, had his stuff together, and had I known, I probably would have done the same thing.
Right.
So that's that, and then, the jazz band being a big deal and getting featured with a jazz band and learning how to be up front. I remember, the last thing I'll say about high school is I remember when I wanted to be a band director, it was my junior year, and we were sitting in the band hall, and it was like 7 o'clock in the morning, 7:05, 7:10, and we weren't going out to the field. We were getting a lecture about something, and I remember thinking, this could be so much fun. This job could be so much fun. I think I know how to do this job. And it was a perfect assimilation of everything that I had learned from Stan and from Jim and in my trumpet lessons and from my band director, Kim Harrison, and from the Midwest experience and hearing Spring High School when I was up there.
Man.
Yeah.
Make all those connecting points. And then I had heard at a church camp that Texas had like 3-4 band directors per school, and there was like hundreds and hundreds of kids in the bands. And I thought, well, I think I need to go to Texas.
Yeah.
I mean, nobody told me to go to Texas. I just kind of figured that out from what I heard from a kid at church camp and like in the spring memory. And so when I opened up the college catalog, Texas A&M, Baylor, just alphabetically went through the whole thing, looked at the numbers for SAT, student enrollment, and I went, Texas Christian looks interesting.
Yeah.
So that's how I ended up at TCU.
So it sounds like your whole childhood was like this perfect melting pot. Because I mean, you ended up in a state like Kansas where you had that school right there. Were there any other schools in Kansas that were like Shawnee Middle or
Shawnee Mission?
Shawnee Mission, sorry.
Yeah, all of the Shawnee Mission schools had decent band programs. South had the big marching band. North had a good concert band and good jazz bands. West had a great jazz band. So it's not like we were totally in the dark ages.
Okay.
And then the Blue Valley School started to make an appearance as Kansas City moved south and grew south, like Dallas is moving north.
Okay.
Kansas City moved south, so then all of a sudden there was these new schools opening: Blue Valley North, Blue Valley Northwest, Olathe schools, and there was one school in Lawrence High School that was always one of our competitors.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's little pockets.
Yeah, it's just funny just being from Texas. All you know is Texas,
Yeah.
And so you hear about there being quality schools elsewhere. We know there's quality schools out there. It's just kind of foreign.
Yeah.
It's foreign as a concept.
That's absolutely the truth. And I've been judging with Bands of America for about a decade now, and I've judged all over. And the thing that is so true is, number one, everybody's getting better. And Texas can't consider itself, can't consider itself in a different league anymore. There are people that are figuring sound out, and they're figuring out the importance of fundamentals and skill development, and a lot of that is coming from collaborations in drum corps, where Texas teachers are teaching with people from across the country, and they're all sharing ideas and homogenizing in the summer times, and all the daily drills are starting to sound the same. And so basically the things that were our bread and butter, that were our secret sauce, like getting kids to sound right, other people are figuring that out, and it's starting to happen in other places. So I'll go hear groups in Tennessee and go, wow, you could absolutely hold your own in a Texas contest. Now, maybe not for the entirety of it, and not against the biggest dogs here,
right?
But they might be able to do other things better than we can. But we can talk about that if we want to later. But I think the point that we were trying to make here, Ben, was that there are isolated schools all over that are absolutely killing it, that have 300 kids, and they've got rifles spinning in the air, and they've got kids that are freakishly good. I mean, you should hear the Honor Band of America, the Honor Jazz Band of America, and these kids that are improvising from other states, not Texas, where they're just killing us in jazz. It's just what you make important and what you prioritize. Yeah, we have different priorities, but it doesn't make us better.
That's sort of the Texas thing. It's like that's way beyond music too. We think we're just better than everybody else, right?
So then I'll finish up my storyline here. So then I went to TCU, took lessons from Steve Weger, who was principal in Fort Worth Symphony. He walked to school every day. He had his hat. He loved cigars. He was a student of Guitarra.
Yep.
And he was very German. He spoke German. He was aggressive but loving, like a compassionate man who would push. I got kicked out of a lesson my freshman year and then never again because I wasn't prepared. He was still breaking habits. So even with Jim Spencer and Stan Kessler, I still had bad habits when I got out of high school. And that's the difference between a high school program in Texas and what I was going through in Kansas is I just think the sheer number of teachers and systems that we have in place cover things like this. But I was still slurring in the wrong spot, tonguing in the wrong spot, and playing too much like a jazz player with jazz vibrato and not always holding rhythmic integrity and values. But I was surrounded by these Texas All-Staters at TCU. And so when I'm side by side Toby Jones, who was an all-state jazz kid, I'm going, okay, well then I just need to sound like you. I just need to start to copy you. And Cecil Mathai, who was the principal trumpet at TCU, he went on to play in the New World Symphony and National Orchestra, and now he's living in New York, freelance trumpet player. And Cecil was by far the best trumpet player I'd ever heard in my life. And so I just got to play in the wind ensemble with him, and I was like, I just got to sound like that.
Right.
Was he older than you, or were we all the same
He was
age?
a couple years older, yeah. And that by being around those Texas All-State kids and college kids, that was my new benchmark. That was my standard. So I put in the time in the practice room and eventually caught up to everybody and made it into the wind ensemble. I think I was second or third chair for most of the time in my later years when I was there.
And then you went off to...
Then I went to teach. So in 2000, I student taught at LD Bell with Joe Grzybowski. We went to Midwest Clinic, Steve Madsen at Bedford Junior High, which is where you went to school.
Yep.
They were Triple B honor band, so we got to do both of those trips
Very cool.
in my student teaching experience. And then, which way I could sit and talk about that the entire time. But when I finished that, Steve Madsen told me to go check out Bob Brandenberger at Liberty Junior High in Richardson.
Yeah. I went to school with BJ Brandenberger.
That's right.
Yep.
And so I went and I visited with Bob, and he had just finished up teaching at SMU. And we sat and had a nice visit, and he just told me about how colleges were not preparing kids to be band directors, and nobody's doing it right, and da-da-da. And then he sent me over to Berkner.
Yep.
And this was 2000, so you were graduating? You were a senior?
I graduated in 2000.
Did you guys play Passacaglia?
Yep, on Bach.
I came to a rehearsal.
Yeah.
I watched you play that.
That is wild.
Yeah. Yeah, we did that and the Firebird.
Yeah.
And like the Commando March or something.
Yeah.
I think we won Midwest that year.
And Eric Rogers was a classmate of yours.
Well, so we just missed each other. He was a senior when I would have been a freshman, and that was back when it was 10 through 12.
And so he was a couple years younger than I was at TCU,
Yeah.
and he was a great player. He would nod off every once in a while.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have to hit him like, dude, wake up.
Right. Sounds about right.
You look over, there's a little drool. Hey.
So, but the thing that the memory that I'll share about Eric was that whenever he talked about the songs that they had played in high school, I thought, how did you play all that in high school? Like, we're playing that now.
Right.
He goes, oh, I've played this. I'm like, shut up, you haven't played that.
Yeah.
You know, we played this. I was a sophomore. What?
Yeah.
So, I mean, that was, at that point at TCU, I still didn't really know the depth of, like, that Berkner was out there, that Lake Highlands was out there, that Capel was out there, that Haltom was out there, even though it's down the road. I just didn't, we weren't out observing enough. So I didn't really see Texas band in action until I student taught.
Right.
And then I went, whoa.
Yeah.
I had no idea. So when interviewed with the Berkner guys, I interviewed with the Lake Highlands team like later that day. And I was going to Montreux Jazz Festival with TCU, and I knew that I wanted to have my job secured before I went on the summer trip.
Yeah.
So Marion West called from Lake Highlands and offered me the job, and I said, absolutely, I'll take it. So I could have been a Berkner Ram just as easily because I hit it off with Mike and Pete, and I think we would have made a great team as well. So then I taught for 6 years. I'm almost done with the storyline here.
It's all good.
And then we can go back. So
were you at the high school?
Started at my first job was Lake Highlands High School. I was the third director. I should know this. Fourth director. They had 4 directors. I was the fourth director. I didn't have a concert band. I just taught the jazz band, which was pretty good. And Annie Clark was in that band. She's a guitar player. She's St. Vincent, so she's making millions of dollars now as like an indie rock pop star.
Wow.
Tuck and Patty were her aunt and uncle. They're a famous jazz duo. So anybody that's listening, go check out St. Vincent. So she was in my jazz band, and that was a pretty amazing jazz band. The second year I had a concert band, and then kind of worked my way up. And next thing you know, I was about 3 years in, I was teaching the marching band and the second band, doing grade 5 literature and figuring it all out. So I was there for 5 years. Then I taught Lake Collins Junior High because I wanted to go teach beginners. And I had taught beginners every year. Every year at Lake Collins I had 1, 2, or 3 elementary schools that I would have to go, and it'd be a heterogeneous class. So I might have 3 clarinets, 2 flutes, a bassoon, trombone, and a percussionist on stage for 45 minutes. Ready, go.
Wow. Yeah.
What are you going to do first? All right.
That's how I started, yeah.
So was Marion West there the entire time that you were there?
She was there the entire time, and she was absolutely the most influential teacher that I could have had, and was so fortunate to have. She and Billy Nero and Ramsey McDonald and Randy Phillips and Laura Appling, all of those guys were really hard on me my first few years teaching. There was times that they thought maybe they didn't get the right guy, and it's because I just didn't know. I didn't know how to do Texas band. Yeah. So I just did what they did, and copied and monkey see, monkey do, and then I started to understand the concepts, and then Mr. Green started coming around, and I started to see him work. Mr. Benzer started to help my band, and then about 6 years into that job, after teaching Lake Collins Junior High, I thought, I just need to go back and get my master's. Okay. And I was going to go to TCU, but then I saw David Bertman at Midwest, and we started talking, and I had almost gone to work for the Cavaliers in 2000, but I didn't. Instead, my roommate, John Pasquale, who's now the marching band director at Michigan, he went to go teach Cavaliers and got to experience all those world championships with them. Huh. Yeah. And I did not, and that's okay.
You're not bitter.
I'm not bitter. I did teach with Cavaliers for 1 summer, and that was great. But it was this close, and I was going to, but something fell through. But that's a whole complete other story. So I went to University of Houston in 2006 and was there for 1 year as a graduate student, and then they hired me as the third director, and then Tom Bennett retired, and then I got moved up to the second director, and then 2009, here I am teaching college band and amazing literature and amazing players, and I got a call from LD Bell, and it was Jeremy Earnhardt had moved on to be a fine arts director, and they had an opening, and Van was moving up, so I moved into the number 2 spot at Bell, and was there.
Working alongside Brandon Holt.
That's right.
Yep.
His dynamic team, Bill Zier, Daryl Fife, all of those guys. Ben Moffmer joined us a couple years later. So I was there for 5 years at LD Bell, and then we got a call out of the blue from Drew Watkins, superintendent in Prosper, and I had to look Prosper up. I didn't know where it was. Right. And the story I'll tell, this is a true story. That spring break, before he called in April. That spring break, it was about 2013, 14, I guess. Christina, my wife, was an attorney, and she was commuting to Dallas every day. We had 2 kids, young kids. We were ships passing in the night, young couple trying to raise a family, and I'm doing the competitive marching band thing, but I'm the number 2 person, and she's throttling it with her career, and it's just crazy. And we were sitting in our kitchen, and we said, we just need somebody to call us from out of the blue and offer us everything we've ever wanted and give us a fresh start. And a month later, Dr. Watkins called.
Isn't that wild?
So call it prayer, call it manifestation, whatever you choose to call it, the universe responded. And
in hindsight, it was a great call. Looking back, I think you took quite a leap of faith.
Yeah, it was scary. Yeah. But one of my number 1 goals leaving TCU was and we talked about this in our ed classes. We had a great crew of kids in the same ed class. So John Pasquale, who went to Michigan, George Townsend, who's one of the band directors at Duncanville, Dallas Hodge. We would all sit, James Smith, we would all sit and talk about what we wanted to do with our careers. And one of my goals was to take a program that hadn't seen a whole lot of success and take everything I know and try it and see if it works. That way I know if it's me.
Right.
Because at Lake Highlands there was already a system in place. I mean, we were a finalist at BOA San Antonio my last year, 2005. Hebron was one place behind us.
Wow.
That was Hebron's, I think, first or second year.
Wow.
And we, Lake Highlands was third in honor band, went to Midwest. So I was in a program that was already cooked.
Right.
LD Bell was already cooked. So all of these places had already arrived, so to speak, in the competitive band world. And so Prosper I'd never heard of, and I looked him up online and I saw some YouTube videos and I went, that's where I need to go. And I will say this for the record, it's not like the Prosper band was bad when we got here.
Okay.
It wasn't bad. There were systems that we put in place that helped us to get traction and move it to the next level. Absolutely. But there was a tape from Randy Vaughn, who was a UIL judge, that said that their version of, what was it? It'll come to me in a second. Chester was one of the best he'd ever heard. And Watchmen, they apparently played the lights out of Watchmen. There was good players. There was individual good players.
Yeah, without a doubt. Yeah.
So it's not like we were starting from scratch, and that was the biggest surprise that I had was Laura Bell and her team, Adam Davis, all those guys. They were good. Robin Winter, Josh Furman, they were good teachers, and they taught kids to love band. And there was plenty of kids,
Right.
but we lost 60 or so kids before we even started. So the transition was all the band directors moved on, and we got to bring our whole new team. So I brought on Brad Honeycutt and Ben Awney and Tyler Sammons and Wes Cartwright and Bill Zier, and we just designed a show. And all of a sudden, we were last place in our first contest. We lost 60 kids, so the numbers were down. And then we, over the course of the next 2 years, built it. And we can talk about that more, towards the end or whenever you guys want. Just the history of how Prosper was able to do that. But we brought in people like Michael Attaway, it wasn't just one person. It wasn't the me show.
Right.
I learned this from Mr. Green. Whenever you talk to Eddie Green about the success, whether it was Lake Highlands Junior High, Lake Highlands High School, Western Michigan, University of Houston, he always gives credit to his private teachers. And I learned that by listening to him, because he kept saying, just like Mr. Green always does, he says the same things over and over again, just in different ways. And every time it's profound. And so I knew that was the secret. You bring in a great team of people, and you keep the ball moving, you pass the ball. And Michael, we can talk about the things that I was always trying to give Michael the ball, like, hey, come into this rehearsal, give us some feedback. You should take the brass choirs. You should do this. You should do this. And that was the whole genesis for how we really got, I keep using the word traction, but traction to get it to where we could be competitive at the state and national level.
Right, and that was one of the things that when Spencer Smith was coming on, he was asking me what did I like about working in Prosper, and I remember the first thing that I told him was that I always felt included. I always felt like I was a part of the program. There are some places that I taught that I didn't really feel like I was in the program, and it's hard to keep the kids invested when they don't feel like you're part of the program. So you, from day one, were very inviting. It helped being a marching technician, and it helped having a friend like Michael Attaway there. But that was one of the things I was like, dude, you're going to feel like you're a part of the family immediately.
And ultimately, that's what we should be promulgating to the students, that feeling of come be with us, come and sit with us, sit side by side. Let us impart wisdom. Let us impart knowledge. We want you in our circle. Rather than, there's so many people that think marching band, because of the history of discipline and military background, they think it's ba, ba, ba. I'm going to tell you what to do. You're my army. You're my clone army. You're all going to do the way, and you're going to sit the way, and you're going to sound the way. And it's very ego-driven, and it's very, very... Look at how competitive... See, I have this dichotomy, and I think it's in all of us. It's like art should not be in the realm of competition. We shouldn't have competitive art.
Right.
Yeah.
We should have art for art's sake. So Van Gogh, I'm sure he was maybe competing with people around him, but probably not.
Right.
I'm sure Mozart was, but maybe not. Probably not. And so competition in itself is healthy because it pushes us to be better, right?
Right.
And it's how we pace ourselves, and it's how we push ourselves is through competition. But inherently, we shouldn't have competitive theater and competitive singing. We should just have music for music's sake and for our sake. But I see it's like the yin and yang of it.
Right.
There's so many benefits to it that I still believe in it and the value of it educationally. But we have to have a healthy respect for the opposite, which is we're just doing this to communicate to our audience and to express beauty. That's all we're really doing.
That's exactly what Brian Kalk's philosophy was. He wasn't trying to play a better bolero than somebody else. Mm-hmm. He was trying to play his best bolero, and if the cards fell where they fell, that was so. He was always looking introspectively. So I think that's I understand what you're saying now, and that's
right.
I like it. I like.
And I think if you think of it like that, then it's easier to be inclusive of all of the kids, not just the best kids.
Right.
If you care about your last 5 chairs in your section as much as you do your first 5 chairs, then you're teaching me, because I was in the bottom at Indian Hills Middle School. I was 5th or 6th chair out of 7.
Right.
So you got if you're inclusive and you really do care about all of the kids because you just care about students and not so much about their ability or skill level or where they place on that chair test, then all of a sudden you're going to have a healthier band program. You're going to have more success because people are part of the team.
Right. Yeah. There's a. Do you know the name Charlotte Mason?
No.
She's an education reformer from the 1800s, but one of the big things that she used to stress was that all students are people. Mm-hmm. And so you start with that, there's inherent value because they are a person. Mm-hmm. And so she would talk about how you take a little kid and sit them on your lap and just imagine them, stop imagining them as a baby, mm-hmm. but a person that you can impart something of value to. Mm-hmm. I think it's important. And some kids, like you said, just need to marinate a little bit in the system.
Yeah.
And then they just kind of catch it.
And to kind of extend from that thought, kids are human beings. They're young adults, and they're really smart.
Yeah.
They might not act like it because they don't know how to act like it. But what's going on inside is brilliant. But they might be a clumsy, fumbly puppy on the outside, and they look like they're completely disheveled and disorganized and chaos. But inside, in that brain, they've got so much figured out.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I always say to teachers is, how many times does it take for a dog to growl at you for you to be afraid of that dog? Once.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then you're always afraid of that dog. And so teachers have to understand the importance. When they're in a bad mood, and I'm not perfect. I would get in a bad mood, or I'd get frustrated, be 11:30 at night, and some kid acted like a clown on the bus, and I'm mad.
Right.
And I might say something to that kid in that moment in a heated tone, because I'm so perturbed by their choice that they might be afraid of me for the rest of their high school career.
Right.
But the more aware you are as a teacher, you know when to play that card and to use that voice. Because sometimes kids need that voice to turn them around and to get their attention, right? But that is the impact that we have. And so it's not just when we snap at kids. They know when we think that they're not smart.
Yeah.
Right. Humans are super, super sensitive creatures, and they can read your face, they can hear your muttering, and they know when you don't think they're good. So that's what I remember in 2nd grade learning the golden rule. I remember it being on the chalkboard, and we had to write it down.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking about it in 2nd grade, and from that point, I tried to follow that rule. And I was heavily involved in church camp and in my youth group, and we learned how to see the value in everybody, and that transformed me, and that's how I tried to approach my life. And again, I'm not perfect. I'm not always the most successful, just like we are. We're all human. But in general, I think that if you ask my students, they would say, over the course of my history, a majority of my students say he cares about us.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you can't fake that.
Right.
Right.
And you guys know teachers that don't do that. Teachers that you go, yeah, I don't think they have that.
Yeah.
I was talking with Michael about this last week, but I was reading a book by Chris Voss called Never Split the Difference, and psychologists at I think it was at Princeton, they were doing a study about just the way the brain perceives words, and they found that only 7% of what is actually said matters. The rest of it is body language, how it's said, and how the person perceives it. So I think from day one, you've always had this ability to. Basically, the way we put it is it sounds bad, but you've got the kids eating out of the palm of your hand, and that's not
is not the intent.
No, but
the intent is just for there to be a connection, right?
Yeah,
it's the exchange of information. Like, I'm going to say this, and you're going to say it back to me, and that's how I want my own kids, the 3 Alstrin kids. Yeah. That's how I'm trying to raise them too,
right?
And what you're referring to, I think, is paraverbal communication. So you have verbal, nonverbal, and paraverbal, and the paraverbal is how you say it,
right?
And there's so many ways you can say it, but it's not only what you say and how you say it, it's how you look. And students are constantly watching how you go about your business, and they just watch to see if you're cleaning the room, how much you care about the room. That all of those things feed into their trust and your relationship with them. And, if you show people how to do right and you act right, they will eventually start to trust you because you're doing right and you're showing right and you're consistent with it.
Yep.
Yeah. And they're watching. So even though I might be snapping at Attaway, you're learning from that. So I'm growling at him. You're still afraid of the growl.
Right.
Or vice versa. If I'm praising him, you're wanting that praise. So when I'm calling on students, I'm doing it in a way sometimes to get their attention. Sometimes I'm doing it in a way to reaffirm this is the kind of relationship we want. This is the connection we want. Does everybody see this? We're modeling a healthy teacher-student relationship. When you do that enough, before you know it, all of the kids who are kind of in the middle, so you have the engaged, you have the disengaged, and then you have the actively disengaged.
Yeah.
And there was a Gallup poll that showed it. See if you can guess the percentages that this Gallup poll came up with. And they did a test on a variety of companies and teams. How many would you say in an average group are engaged?
20%.
I would say less than that, maybe. I don't know. I would 25%.
Okay. What about disengaged?
20%.
This is actively disengaged?
No, just disengaged.
Just disengaged. 40%.
Okay. And then actively disengaged would be?
I guess it'd be 60%. Oh, wait.
I feel like
I'd say
right.
the actively 20, and then the disengaged would be 60. I think that would be the most in.
You're really
disengaged.
close.
Okay. Well, I'm going to agree.
So
with
the
you.
Gallup poll showed 30% were engaged, 54% disengaged, and 16% actively disengaged.
Yeah.
And that's about, going back to the history of the Prosper Band, that's about where we were when we took over. There was 30% that was engaged. Like, they're band kids, like, here we go, I'm ready.
Yeah.
Put us in, coach. And then you have 54% that are disengaged. And it fluctuates. You go back and forth from being engaged to disengaged to actively. You're floating, right?
Right.
It can be, on a given day, you can be all three.
Yep.
Right?
Right.
And towards the end of that first season, we started to have more actively disengaged because they were like, why are we still pushing? We got last place in the last contest. Why are we still pushing?
Right.
So,
you see that definitely because the last episode we did. I don't know. Did you see the one with Caleb?
yeah,
I think he was as a freshman.
he was actively disengaged at times.
Yes, but I think a lot of disengaged.
Yeah,
and
mostly disengaged, and then there's a couple times that we bust. I'm gonna tell this on a story on Caleb. Sorry, Caleb, but we were at the Birdville or HEB marching contest, and we were all sitting together as a group, and he chose to go back to the school buses with a group of other actively disengaged students, about 10 of them, and we busted them. What are you guys doing on the bus? We're the band's sitting over here. What are we doing?
Right.
But most of the time he was just disengaged, and really that started for him, I think. He didn't think he was a very good trumpet player.
Right.
And to be fair, he wasn't the best.
Right.
But he had also been cut from the basketball team. So he had a double whammy. He didn't think he was good at band. He didn't think he was good at trumpet. And then his sport that he was passionate about, he got cut from.
Right.
And so he just kind of just went along. And then I pulled him in to the office, the old office, and I told him, I said, Caleb, you could be one of the best members of this program. You could be the best leader. You have it in you. And I wasn't saying that just to fluff him up and prop him up. I saw it in him. You have the ability to turn this around, and if you go all in on this, it could change your life, and you could change other kids' lives, and you could be a leader.
Yeah.
And it took him about a year to get traction on that, and the next thing you know, he's a rock star.
Yeah. That's awesome.
It was, I remember Ben Ani called me into the office and he said, "You need to look at this kid." He said, "I'm a big Caleb Boulanger fan." And I was like, "All right, okay, great." And so I take him the first lesson, and it's like I'm talking to a statue. I mean, there's like no engagement there, and I think he is the model person with the idea that most kids just need a little inspiration.
Right.
And then all of a sudden it happened, and I mean, by the time he graduated, he's like the perfect student.
Yeah.
Right. Which was funny for me because when I came, I think he was basically already becoming the model student.
Right.
So I would hear stories my first year as a tech about Caleb not being that kid, and it just that must have been a pretty wild transition.
It's not like he was bad. He was disengaged to actively disengaged.
Yeah.
He just wasn't pushing forward.
Yeah.
And so it's all this natural talent sitting there. When everybody has the natural talent inherent in them, I believe. We just have to find the right tools to sculpt it out of them. He took a little bit of nudge from me, and this is where this is a perfect example of how it wasn't the Alstrin show. I can't take the credit for all this. Had Adaway not been there and Ani not been there, it took all three of us to pull Caleb along.
Right.
Yeah.
And then once he started to paddle on his own, then he had people falling behind him.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that was the most powerful thing, is
Right.
that it was like a vacuum of
Right.
positivity.
Right. And then that's when you start to shift the normal Gallup spread of 30, 54, 16, and we started to get more kids actively engaged. So we can change the bell curve. We can shift it to our advantage, and once you get a critical mass, enough kids spinning the right direction, before you know it, it's the story of the 100th monkey. You guys know the 100th monkey?
I don't.
I don't think so.
Okay, so real quick, the 100th monkey is it was an island, and they were testing, atomic bombs, and I'm not sure where the island was, but this might be a parable, it might be an actual story.
Okay.
To be honest, but so it wiped out all the life on the island, and they were bringing the monkey population back, but the monkeys kept dying off or something like that. And one monkey figured out that what was causing the issue was that the monkeys were eating fruit from the trees, but it was radioactive still.
Got it.
So then a monkey figured out, or they trained a monkey, one of the two, to wash the fruit in the creek or the water before they ate it. And then that monkey started teaching other monkeys. And then once it got to the 100th monkey, then all of the monkeys were doing it.
Huh.
So that's the story, and that's critical mass.
Right.
Is you get enough people, and before you know it, it's just like with smoking. It used to be when we were growing up.
Yeah, smoking sections everywhere, and
I can remember driving to school, and I was in a carpool, and my friend's mom would smoke cigarettes in the car on the way to school, and she would keep the windows up.
Yeah.
And play music.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's how she
That's
relaxed. Yeah, and so it's just, but that has shifted, and now everybody knows that smoking's bad.
Yeah.
Right.
I remember smoking on airplanes.
Yeah,
Ashtrays. They still have the ashtrays.
Ashtrays in airplanes, and there'd be gum in it.
Yeah.
And of course, as a kid, you're just like playing with that. So disgusting.
And for whatever reason, when you took off, then the no smoking sign will go on. Then it'll go off when you were going to land.
Yeah.
It's like, what changed?
Right.
Yeah.
And so it's the same thing with culture in a group. Once you get enough kids that believe in something, and they have to really believe it, then you can start to do pretty amazing things.
That's one of the things that I think that I have tried to learn the most from you is the fact that there are those key influencers. You reach that key kid in there, and then all of a sudden you have a culture that's created around that.
Right. Yeah. Marion West said all she needs is 10 kids to build a band program.
Yeah.
Like a wind ensemble, you just need a good flute and a good clarinet and da-da-da. And just like Madsen says, if you can teach one kid to articulate, the whole section sounds like they know how to articulate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's the truth of the power of one person, and that's why the kids are in every band program across the world. When the seniors graduate, what are we going to do without so-and-so?
Every year.
Well, we're going to make a new one.
Right.
And the power of one kid cannot be understated, and they give permission for the younger boys and the younger girls to be a mature male,
right,
a mature female. Here's what a responsible kid acts like, and that doesn't happen in any other organization. Maybe a sport, maybe a volleyball or a baseball or a healthy functioning team.
Right.
You have that progression of, I want to be like that kid when I grow up.
Right.
But in band, the difference is those kids are usually good musicians, good to great, usually good to great academically, and they're usually pretty good people.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that's why when people say we've kind of cornered the market on the best kids in the school, yeah, we have, but it's not just that we're collecting them, we're building them, we're training
made them.
And we're one of the last strongholds of discipline, I think, in the school system.
Yeah, I would agree.
Because we can call them to attention.
I think what's important about those kiddos, too, is that, when my students look to me, I'm kind of like an unattainable object. But when they look to the leaders of the section,
I can be like that.
I can be like that. They're a year older.
It's a stepping stone.
Yeah, exactly.
And Caleb Belanger is one step away from being Ben Nobles.
Right.
If he just plays his card right and he collects that experience in college and he sets that vision. So it's kind of like you can't do it unless you see it.
Yeah.
Right? And you can't sound like it unless you hear it.
Yeah.
So, but once you have that concept in your head of what you want to sound like, or what you want to be like, you have that vision, then you can work towards something.
Sort of like, so it reminds me of the 4-minute mile. Do y'all remember what happened when the
absolutely.
One person did it? It'd never been done before. Mm-hmm. One person did it, and then I think 5 or 6 people did it the next year.
Yep.
So now you're not a sprinter unless you could do the 4-minute mile.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
It's just what you do.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you what. Your call. It's 6:15. So we can talk. I know you want to talk golf. You wanted to put a little bit of a pin in the talk. So, what are your thoughts on where we should head?
Well, I would be curious to know what kind of questions you guys have. We can talk about golf. I'll say this one thing about golf because I think most people listening are not that interested in golf. But the reason that I think that I would throw this out there is that Colin Alstrin's 11 and he's playing golf right now and he's also doing trumpet. Mm-hmm. And he is studying with the guys that are in the Jordan Spieth camp. So it's Altus is the name of the company. And they approach golf the way we approach music. We do form work. We do fundamentals. We do skill development. We differentiate the difference between are we working on form here or are we working on skill. Form would be embouchure, mouthpiece placement, breathing, the form of it all, how we're holding our instrument, how we're sitting, how we're breathing, those basic things. And you have to work on that. Then there's skill development. Skill development, can you hit this golf shot 7 out of 10 times? What are your standards for performance? What are your performance standards? I need to hit that green 7 times in a row before I move on. Just like with us, I need to do this series of slurs with this level of execution before I move on to the next thing. That's skill development.
Right.
And then there's playing on the golf course, playing music versus working on the driving range, which is the practice room. So I guess the key thing to me is how these guys are pushing this top level student. So Altus is all about finding the next level, the thing that differentiates the good from the great. And they have a podcast that you guys can check out. And that's the thing that's so interesting is listening to professional golfers talk on their podcast and listen to these teachers talk about what is going to make the difference. Because we're not just going to go out to the driving range and hit a bunch of balls. You must be thinking about why you're getting the results you're getting as you're doing it.
Right.
So don't just hit another ball. Don't just play another note. Don't just play another measure. Think about what you're doing. And I think that's key. It ties back to the Tom Bennett, what did I just say? Mm-hmm. What are you thinking about while you're playing? And that's another structure that I learned from University of Houston and it applies so perfectly to golf or any sport, is you want to think about all these things, right? I need to think about my breathing, my posture, and my intent, and communicating to the audience and sending my sound this way, and I've got to kick, and I've got to voice it this way, and when I get to this note, there's so much noise and mental chatter. But when you're really playing, especially when you're nervous and there's adrenaline,
right,
those thoughts can't be there.
Right. Can't be there at all. Yeah.
Right. Because your sound will reflect the thoughts you're thinking. So if it's noisy and cluttered, your sound's not going to sound right.
Yeah.
Just like a golfer, when you go to the golf course, you shouldn't be thinking all of the technical things. You shouldn't be thinking about form necessarily.
Right.
You should think about see it, feel it, trust it. And so there's so many parallels. That's been fascinating for me to see as a teacher and to glean some things from these other teachers that I think are master teachers. But it's also fascinating to watch from my child's eyes, an 11-year-old who has golf coaches who are pushing him to be the best. Meanwhile, he's taking trumpet lessons with you. So just getting to watch that has been just a really fun, juicy thing for me.
Right. And that's that double whammy, because I played golf myself when I was younger, and I took lessons for about a year and a half, but just financial reasons I couldn't do it anymore. But I just remember it was strange because when you're standing over a golf ball, there's so many things that you're supposed to be thinking about. But then at the end of the day, they tell you, don't think, just swing.
Or think about one thing.
Oh, yeah, right.
And that's a Tom Bennett thing, University of Houston thing, is when you're giving your kids instructions, we're going to play letter A to letter B. Here's classic band director. Okay, trumpets, you're going to think about this. Trombones, you're going to think about this. We're all going to do this. And make sure you breathe. Make sure you breathe now. Don't hold your... And the kids are going, okay, whatever. Can we just play?
Right.
Right? And the University of Houston concept is, all right, I'm going to give you this one thing to think about. I want you to think about staying full of air the entire time. Here we go. Finish the segment. All right, what were we thinking about? And at first, bands go, huh? Well, I was thinking about the F sharp.
Right.
And so kids aren't thinking the same thing.
Yeah.
And then the smart kids will key on and go, we were supposed to think about our breathing. How many of you actually thought about that? A couple hands go up. Well, you keep playing that game, and before you know it, more hands are going up, and kids are actually thinking the same thing.
Right.
So then that way, when you're getting to style, or you're trying to get them to think light, or you're trying to get them to think on the front of the beat, whatever you're trying to get them to think, when you've played that game of pass enough, then there's a chance that you can get 65 kids to all think about it at the same time, because you've been building them up, learning that game all along. And in a symphony orchestra, I think there's probably hundreds of thoughts going on at any given time.
Right.
The music's the music.
Right.
But there's so many thoughts. So I don't think that it's a perfect model. I don't think that Berlin needs to think about that.
Right.
So we're just talking about basic building blocks for grade school.
Right. Well, so I guess the final question, we could just ask you where you see the Prosper Band program going. Where do you see yourself as a fine arts director in the next couple of years? Like, where do you see the next? We've got Rock Hill opening up next year, which is very exciting, and there's another middle school opening up.
Rushing Middle School.
It's Rushing. That's the name.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot going on in Prosper. So where
I tell people all the time, it's like watching life on fast forward.
Yeah.
From being a resident and watching traffic signals go in and lanes expand and houses go up.
Entire neighborhoods, just all of a sudden they're there. Yeah.
And so I'm doing a presentation to the school board on Monday, so I've been running some data and statistics. 48% of the teachers in Prosper were not in that same position last year.
Oh my gosh.
No, 48%. Yeah, 40% are in the same position. So it's 50-50.
Wow.
Every other person's in a new job, or you're a new person.
Wow.
When I go to classes, so right now as the fine arts director, I'm going to all the fine arts classes across the district. There's 70 fine arts teachers. So that means elementary music, elementary art, Suzuki, art, band, choir, dance, orchestra, theater. And as I go to these different classes, I'll ask them, all right, who knows who Dr. Watkins is? And that's one of the things about Prosper is most of the kids know the superintendent. And that's one of the things that people love about it. It's just a perfect little example. And there's so many more examples. And so then I do a show of hands, and about 4 or 5 kids just look at me blankly. And I go, did you guys just move in? Yes, sir, we just moved in. Okay, well, you'll get to know Dr. Watkins pretty soon. Yeah. And then I'll say, I'm like Dr. Watkins, but just for art, band, choir, dance, orchestra, theater. And they go, oh. And I go, so I go all the fine arts classes. I have a lot of fun. So I'm just introducing so that they know who I am the next time this guy shows up. Don't be scared of this guy. So I'm doing all of that, but it's a very telling sign of just the growth. We're seeing that many kids and that many teachers that don't know, quote unquote, the Prosper way or what we're all about. And that's going to continue. It's never going to settle down.
Yeah.
Not for another decade.
Yeah.
And so as we open up Rock Hill and we bring on 250 new teachers, and we bring on another middle school worth and another elementary school worth, and then we do it again a couple of years. So 2022-23 will be middle or high school 3. I saw blueprints for high school 3 just a couple of days ago.
Wow. So
then we're going to do it again and do it again. So what's the answer? How do we do this? Well, that's part of the reason that I took this job. I saw the window opening, and I thought, there's somebody that's got to be there to help be the gatekeeper. So I'm sitting in a bunch of interviews. And when I tell you we're bringing in amazing people, I'm telling you we're bringing in amazing people. That's the answer. We just got to keep bringing in the best of the best. So when I'm screening art teachers for middle school, 85 applicants. Number 1's pretty good.
Yeah.
Wow.
Number 2's pretty good.
Wow.
Number 3's pretty good. So when we're in our finalist interviews, they're all pretty good. Right. And it's just pick the best one for the school right now. And so while we think about that, we also think why should we limit our thinking? Why should we limit that it's not going to be as good, or it's not going to feel the same, or it's not going to be this or that? I would argue the opposite. I would argue that it's going to be better and better and better, and it's going to be exponentially better because we're bringing in people that are exponentially better. Mm-hmm. People are flocking to come here, not only the teachers, but the families. So as people move to Prosper, why do they move to Prosper? Why do they move to Frisco? It's not just a Prosper thing. It's moving to a new neighborhood like this that's growing as fast. We just happen to be the fastest.
Right.
They want good schools. They want a nice house for the best bang for their buck. Be able to get to work pretty easily. Highway system.
Right.
But let's go back to the number one thing. It's the schools.
Right.
That they're coming for. And so when you have that investment and the parents are willing to pay the tax dollars, are willing to pay a little extra for the house to get the better educational system, they are therefore bought in and invested in their kids' education. They're not going to, for the most part, families are not going to move here and say, oh, they've got great schools. Hey, see ya, kid. Good luck.
Right. Yeah.
They're going to say, show me your homework.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so when they're invested, that's why I tell teachers all the time, call the parents. Email the parents, tell them what a great job their kid is doing, build a relationship, because that our parents are advocates. And when they find out that their kid is slacking or not doing their job, you call me and tell me Colin Alstrin he's just not been prepared the last 2 weeks. I'm not going to whip him with a belt. That's for sure.
Right.
But I'm going to sit with him and make sure he's doing his work.
Right.
And so's mom. And that's the culture that we're breeding here, is a culture where excellence is the standard and where people want to be the best.
Right.
And that's why it's so rewarding to teacher, because as you go down the row, kid after kid after kid, they're coming from a pretty solid home where the parents care about education and they care about, their kid's success. So I think that Rock Hill is going to be amazing. I did a walkthrough the other day. It's a beautiful building. It's got a ton of natural light. I helped to design the fine arts wing. The art rooms all have garage doors that open up to a courtyard.
Wow.
That is awesome.
It's just a nice building. And if you look at Hayes Middle School, you've been to Hayes, right? You've been to Hayes. It's just a nice building. You walk in, you go, I could go to school here. Yeah. This is really nice. And we're going to continue to do that. Dr. Bradley is the one that leads all of that, and the district is committed to providing the best facilities. And like I said, the best teachers are coming here, and they're flocking in droves because not only are we paying okay, but they want the Prosper experience. Now, it's my job as the fine arts director to make sure that I'm helping to remove barriers, to make sure that they have what they need, the resources that they need, that they have the development that they need. We're not just going to hire you and then leave you and say, good luck. Right. We're going to go, how's it going? What can we do to help? Oh, I'm struggling with this or that. Okay, well, I'm going to connect you to this teacher because that teacher is a rock star at this. So you guys are going to trade videos of the opening 5 minutes of your class.
Right.
We're going to compare notes on how we're going to make that better. Mm-hmm. So we're going to develop our people. And that to me is, this is the small window that I jumped through, was I would rather build multiple programs than just the Prosper High School band.
Got it.
So we found state and national success. We checked that box. We set a new standard. Now, the question is, can we do that with Rock Hill and with High School 3 and High School 4? And how do we become the next Leander or Louisville or better?
Right.
How do we do that? Well, we got to have somebody like me that's pollinating and spreading ideas and connecting people and being the gatekeeper and saying, yes, we need you, come be with us. So it's the same concept as building a band program, but it's building it for more kids, far more kids. And if you think about it from my perspective, I'm looking at half of my teachers have been in the classroom alone for years. Elementary art, elementary music, maybe the middle school theater teacher, middle school art. They're the only ones that teach their subject. What does band have?
3 to 4.
An army with private teachers, yeah.
So some programs have it, theater, art, choir. We have multiple. We can sit and have a cup of coffee and do a sanity check and go, how are we going to help this kid? We can PLC, we can problem solve. But when you're a singleton, when you're the only one, what happens there?
Out on your own,
Mm-hmm. You go solo. or
Yeah.
you burn out, or you're not as sharp. You start to dissipate. Entropy sets in, right?
Right.
So you need somebody like me that's going to come along. And when I go and I say, I'm not here to judge you or beat you up, I'm here to help you. I'm going to be a jetpack. I want to help you go faster. So that is really the gist of what I do on a daily basis. I'm running around like a chicken with my head cut off, ordering instruments, looking at blueprints for schools, setting up professional learning for my people, connecting people that need help, coaching people that need help, and going to lots of meetings.
Right.
And every once in a while, I get to go to a band rehearsal.
Right.
And I just jump in and I just start teaching. And I'm going to do the same thing at Rock Hill. But I'll do it more and more. I've kind of deliberately stepped away from the Prosper band so that Prosper can find its new identity with Mr. Holt and all of the new directors.
Right.
And there's enough of pieces of the Prosper puzzle that were already in place that Prosper is continuing to be successful. Now, it's bumpy, and some kids might go, well, this isn't the same. It's not as good, or it's not as this. Well, that's you.
Right.
It was never me. It was never me. It was the kids. Now, I set up systems, but just like Mr. Holt's setting up systems. So buy into the systems that are being set up. Put 100% of your heart and soul into what you're doing, and it'll be good.
Right.
But the problem is if kids do it halfway because they want it to be how it was in the past, first of all, they're living in the past. Mm-hmm. Number two, they're not applying what we taught them. So that's on them. So the future of the Prosper Band is not up to Mr. Holt or any of the teachers. It's up to the students.
Right.
Yep. Yep.
Well, I think that's a perfect cap. I mean, I was curious what you were doing with your day now. I feel sometimes I imagine you just
Right.
I'm just eating bonbons and Fritos,
Right.
pontificating, looking at the stars.
Well, genuinely, we appreciate you being here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It means a lot to us, and I know the kids are going to get an awesome kick out of this, just being able to hear from you again, because you have stepped away, but you've been doing a lot of stuff that's your new duty, and they're going to be excited to hear from you. So this has been our most anticipated thing.
Highly anticipated.
I wish you guys all the best of luck with it. I think it's fun. I've done a podcast before, and I think it is a lot of fun just to sit and talk and let it all out, and you never know where it's going to go, and that's what's so fun about a podcast.
Right.
And the thing that I think is so unique about it is it's a perfect intersection of the kids getting to interact with the adults in a different way without being in the same room,
Right.
but just to hear our thoughts. And like listening to you guys, you don't always talk about music, you don't always talk about band, but that's the real world.
Right.
And that shows the kids that you're human beings, and they connect to you because of that. And so because you're doing that and you're building trust, the day you tell them, hey, you really need to learn your F-sharp scale, they're going to go, okay.
Right.
Because they have a relationship with you. And I think that if we could do that with all of our teachers, we would be in a different world in education.
Yeah.
It should be more like a community feel. And that's one of the things that's so unique about band is that we have lots of people involved in a group project. And it feels like family because we get to work with them for so long, and so we have the ability to impact their lives and change lives.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, well.
Looking forward to see what you guys do next.
Yeah, man.
I think it's time for some steak.
All right.
All right. See ya.
Bye.